All right, call to order. Board of Directors meeting, Whatcom Transportation Authority, Thursday, October 17th, 2024. Let's start with roll call, please.
All right, Donovan.
Here.
Hawkinson.
Here.
Cortez.
Here.
Whatcom. Currently absent. Lilliput is absent. Mayor Lund is absent. Do we have executives to do online? Absent at the moment. Stewart.
Here.
Right, we do have a quorum.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Uh-oh.
Michael limps in at the last minute.
We're talking about budget. Vicky had a great idea. Let's bring pie since we're talking about budget. How much pie? Yeah, exactly.
All right, moving on to item C, executive session on potential litigation update. The board will now meet in executive session for an update on potential litigation as allowed by RCW 42.30.110.1. Board will be in executive session for approximately 10 minutes until 8:12 a.m. The board is not expected to take further action on this matter following the executive session. You're not supposed to be here, please.
The board is extending the executive session for an additional 5 minutes.
You're right.
All right, item D, citizen communications. Each speaker is allowed a maximum of 3 minutes. Is there anyone online, not seeing anyone in person, that would like to unmute and address the board? Not see. Sure.
Just let you know, I received citizen communication from Ms. Stewart. It is a request from a Whatcom Events that runs E2C for some assistance from WTA. Possibly I'll pass this on to you.
Thank you.
We have a special events process that we run that through to look at.
And we do provide additional services to see additional trail.
Who's that to do?
If you'd send it to both of us, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right, item E, we have Shonda with a presentation of draft 2025 budget and scheduling a public hearing.
Okay, all right. So we've got a couple of things to talk about. We'll talk about the budget, but we also have an action item to set the public hearing for November 7th. What we would do at that meeting is run through the presentation again and open it up for public hearing. That is subject to maybe what happens with the vote on November 5th. So we have a little timeline at the end of the presentation. So we're going to just dive right in. There's a lot of slides in here that I'm going to skip through rather quickly. They were sent to you earlier, and they're kind of words on slides, and you'll understand the context. So the 2025 budget, as someone sent me an earlier email, it's a robust budget. And what we're approaching it is as we recognize your concerns with your budgets in your jurisdictions. We've heard about Western yesterday. We've heard what the county is doing. We want to respect that and take that into thought. This budget proposes to plans to spend approximately $16 million in cash in 2025. What this expense does is it supports our communities, it supports your communities. It has new service proposed for the waterfront, the hospital, getting ahead of development on King Mountain and in Old Town. We have the TAP projects that are assisting out in Sumas and Linden. So those dollars are investing straight into our communities. And we're strategically planning to get service out there ahead of demand and ahead of travel patterns. That's something that we're trying. We haven't done that frequently in the past, and we're going to see how that goes. So this budget spends down our reserves, which was something the board had asked us to do. But also at the end of 2025, we would still have over $30 million sitting in cash reserves, essentially in our savings accounts. And those accounts are being funded per our current policy. We are also looking at the deficit between operating revenues and operating expenses. Expenses outpace revenues. They continue to do so. We expect them to do that. A new work that we're going to do is we're forming two committees. One is a revenue generation committee, and one is going to be an expense assessment committee. So we will be separately looking at new ways to generate revenue, such as potentially increasing our advertising income or having lease generation revenue. And also at the same time, looking at where in our expenses could we potentially have some reductions, for example. Looking at our insurance, do we insure vehicles for full replacement value? Do we lower deductible? Do we raise our deductibles? Do we extend our vehicle life? Do we lease vehicles? So we will be really peeling those onions down and looking at a way to close that gap. It will be difficult to reverse that gap. Revenues are flat. They're flat this year. Hopefully they won't be flat next year, but we do have about a $6 to almost $7 million operating gap. So we can incrementally get there. Need more work to flip that, but we are starting that process. So this budget looks forward to the future, but it has risk in it. There is risks of spending this money in 2025 and potentially impacting what we do in 26. There's also risk in not spending this money. We don't buy the Bellingham property downtown. We essentially have no way to expand our service downtown, and we will be stuck where we are. So the idea behind the budget is we're proposing something that we think is responsible. We're mitigating this risk. We're setting ourselves up to look at a time frame between this time now and 2026 budget to figure out how do we want to proceed? Do we want to change policy? Do we not want to save so much money so that when projects are ready to go, we have all the dollars saved? Do we want to stretch out those time frames for projects? And so we'll be looking to you to help us with those decisions. We could also hunker down, pull back our proposed initiatives, and maintain WTA the way it is. That's not what we think we heard from the board. But when we put it into dollars, it looks different. And so we're just going to walk through the dollars and kind of talk through our policy level decisions. And please, if you have questions along the way, and let me jump in, back me as needed. So we're just going to these really quick slides. Here's our mission. The budget's developed in sort of our mission, these 4 pillars. This is our intent of the budget. You've seen this before. Strategic resources, financial stability. These are the outcomes that we would like to have for our community and our riders. Seen these before. And then these are the budget themes that we came up with. So as we went through all of our initiatives, yes, no, do we put it in the budget? Do we not fund it? We ended up grouping them into these 6 areas. So these are represented in the expenses we've proposed. So for our operating budget, we have flat revenues, flat fare revenue, sales tax is about equal with what it was at this time last year. We're projecting 2% for next year. The Move Ahead Washington funds, they are retained and reflected in this budget, but again, it's only 2 quarters because we did that pull down early from next year that you're seeing in that 2024 projection line, that $9 million. And our investment income is projected to fall. Rates are coming down, and as we spend cash, we have less dollars to invest. Operating expenses. The assumptions in here are a 9% wage increase for 2025. That is a 3% COLA, and we have lots of employees who are still in the step ranges, which is 5% between each step. And we do have a proposal of 10 new employees in this budget. Benefits went up 11%. Medical was 7 to 8.2% of that with our 2 plans. Our outside services is up. You see, it's pretty consistent with what we're expecting in 24. That is consulting, janitorial, landscaping, legal. We have a lot of design fees going in for work at the north lot. So again, expenses that are really looking to move us forward. The insurance increased 18%. Things cost more, our values have gone up, and the insurance market is tight. There are a lot less folks willing to reinsure. So WISTIC is having a hard time finding that. And then that capital expenditure you see of the 13 million, the biggest piece of that is the property purchase at $6.4 million. We had a very aggressive capital plan in 2024. We expect to have a 93% execution rate. I haven't seen that in a decade here. A lot of that is buses. Remember, we had a ton of vehicles coming in this year, I think over 50, maybe close to 60. And next year's budget is much more, is a little bit more reasonable for capital. But there you see that $16 million loss that we're talking about compared to what we're expecting for this year, which is now 5.8 million. What this budget has in it are some of those things we talked about earlier. So the new service we propose to roll out, it's close to $1 million with operating and vehicle costs. That's in that number. We have the employees needed to support that service in that. We have the property purchase, the transit access funds are in there. So there are things and levers and knobs that we can pull to reduce that dollar. We could have a less ambitious capital plan where in the out years, we talk about pushing zero emission out. We talk about potentially not doing a paint. We talk about not doing the swale to the north lot. So there are things within the board's control that can help us with that.
Just, yeah, but one on loss, that's spending down the reserves, which we've heard the board, we've had $50+ million of reserves. So while it is technically a loss, it's spending it down. When we get to the later slides, we'll have a conversation because those later slides are based on those things that Sean has just been talking about, that we wanted to show if we went ahead with all these things, this is what it would look like. And we do have challenges because it's going to tee up. We're going to have policy level trade-off choices that we're going to have to make going forward. So just for example, in that planning period on the CIP, we've got over $55 million spread across 4 projects. The north lot, a paint booth, Bellingham station expansion, and zero emission fleet transition. 30 million is zero fleet transmission. So there's going to be policy level discussions about if you change those knobs and slide that off and things, that's $10 million a year just in zero emission that goes back into this. So you push off the North Swale and North Watt development, that's what, 4.4 million. So, you know, there's these just knobs that we can turn. But what we wanted to show was if we continued on with those things, this is the problem that we're having, so that it sets the stage for having these trade-off risk-based discussions and come out with the best policy based on where we are. So anyway, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. But,
that was great. Just a quick visual with the pies. So we have the top left pie is revenue, bottom is expenses. So you can see this big blue part here is sales tax. This big yellow part is wages and benefits. So when we take those things out, and our people are very important to us, we want to take care of them. We want to do right by them. There's not a lot of revenue left in the pie to do the other things. So that just illustrates visually sort of the dilemma that we're in right now. New positions, we talked about this. We have 9 of them that are needed to support the new service. So we don't need new service. We have 1 project manager that is needed agency-wide to support projects such as the rapid transit or the Bellingham station expansion. They're going to need specific project management for those types of projects, and we want to get ahead of that and be ready when we're ready to roll those projects out. Capital projects, just a quick little snip of our carryover projects. The big things on here are the Midway lot that will finish up next year. And then just wrapping up some of the things like the APCs and the data terminal on the paratransit vehicles. Very low rollover from the prior year. And then here's the new projects. The property, some vehicle replacement, some expansion for the new service, and some expansion again to address paratransit. So again, a very, I think, reasonable capital project list that we can obtain for next year.
Say reasonable, but I guess when you're spending $14 million, is it more than we can execute in a year, or is is staff fairly comfortable that
I
you can
think-
get it all done?
I think we can get this done next year. From what we got done this year, this is very small. And a lot of those, the vehicles tend to come in over time. We order them sort of in clumps. I think this is very doable for next year.
What we really tried to do is we noticed in looking at past budgets, one of the things that we saw was that we weren't executing very well. And so that capital budget, what we thought was going to get spent, gets carried over. And so it just keeps increasing the cash, and also make sure it wasn't showing the true picture of where things are on how we're spending. And so we've had Andy's unfortunately got a medical day today, but Andy and Devin have been pushing really hard on executing on that to give us a really good idea of what can we get done, what is within the realm of possibility, and then give us a better financial picture of truly what we're spending, and not just constantly carrying over cash.
Yes, Todd?
Yeah, so on this is sort of related to Scott's question. The property acquisition, 6.5 million, whatever. I imagine that can just happen as soon as the transaction goes through. How long would the tenant improvements take for
We
downtown?
estimated, I believe, 6 months to work on the tenant improvements. We have about 6 months of actual rental income in the budget. And that acquisition could still happen this year. I doubt it. We haven't seen the appraisal. So those dollars are actually in both years for right now. But I believe 6 months for the TIs.
And is
It
that-
could go quicker depending on what kind of TIs we need to do for whoever would be leasing part of the building with us.
So wait, but I'm like, this building is not going to be done in 6 months. I may be misunderstanding this, or are you thinking it?
No, we're thinking that we will purchase it and then we will take 6 months to do some work inside to make it appropriate to rent out for tenants. So we don't need all of the space initially. So we'd allocate some of that space for tenants, and we're thinking 6 months would be enough to put in really
And is that
cubicles and offices, since it does have restroom facilities and a lot of that already.
Is that acquisition being discussed publicly, or is it something we're not yet?
I think Les has called it the worst kept secret in Bellingham.
Okay.
I don't know really how officially.
In all honesty, Ted, it's public information, but we're trying not to negotiate in public.
And which building are we talking about? Not the vacant land?
Currently where base camp is located,
Okay, all right.
or was located.
Yeah,
Yes, I
they've
guess
moved
they
now.
moved now. Yeah. Good point.
All right, so here are the really meaty slides where I think we'll spend our time. So this again visually demonstrates the revenue and expense gap. So in the past years, actual results have had revenue above expenses. We're seeing that start to flip. You see that big climb during COVID of the revenues. So our projection out to 2030 is that we will have this gap at the top that we need to fill. These reserves are shown as funded per policy. So as Les was saying, we have that $50 million of projects funded over this course of time. And our policy is to have the money saved when we need to make the expense. So for a vehicle, we're saving for 12 years to cut a check. For the paint booth, we've been saving for 3 years to cut the check. So the sooner we want to do the project, the more we have to front load those reserves. So this is what things would look like given the plan we have now with our CIP. Les mentioned the things that we can change. So these reserve balances can be changed based on policy. It's the two up above where we're going to have to work hard to get those in line. Yes.
So 2 questions. First, on the out years, 25 and beyond, we're spending more than we're taking in every year.
Correct.
That's probably not a sustainable plan for us.
I don't disagree with you.
And then I guess in 26, 7, and 8, how does reserves go up when you're spending more than you're taking in?
Because we have the cash balances. So we'll go to this. We'll go to this slide. There we go. So this red line is cash. Okay. So remember the slide before.
This is the excess reserve over the, okay.
So let's have a talk about cash.
Yeah.
So The yellow operating cash, that's our daily checkbook. That's what we do where our revenue comes in, sales tax come in, we write our checks from. We have, in the past, all our extra cash outside of reserves has gone in that. We will be proposing we take that to a steady $5 million. That's our operating cash. That should work most of the time. If we have a bus purchase, we might have to borrow from a reserve.
And that's the cash flow thing.
It's just cash flow. The operating reserve is the one that is mandatory by policy at 90 days of budgeted expenses. So if we had no revenue coming in, we should be able to pay our bills for 90 days. Then we have fleet and capital. Those are the two where we save our money in anticipation of an expense in 27 or in 2030, where we're doing incremental savings. The capital reserve is, it is the next 2 years of cash that we need. So we are anticipating grants, and if our cash in 27 and 28 is 10 and 7 million, there's 12 million sitting in that reserve today. So we're front loading these expenditures. And that is the policy level that we really want to bring that back next year.
That is based on the projects that we're saying we're going to do. So
approved CIP from April.
Right. And so those are the knobs to talk about. So as I just mentioned with those 4 projects over that planning horizon, that's just through those 4 projects, that's $61 million that drives these numbers. So if you modify or don't do and really analyze things, that completely changes this picture. What we wanted to show here was if we kept doing things just the way we were always doing them, there would be issues. And which challenges, we've recognized that and working on that. And we're fortunate that we have good heavy reserves to be able to still operate and have a couple-year window to really figure this out and have that discussion.
Michael?
Yeah, trying to make sure I understand this graph. Let's ignore the red line.
Okay.
Let's just look at those reserves. Those all represent healthy, if we actually achieve those reserves on those years, that's healthy. That's policy-based appropriate amount of reserves for anticipated needs. Correct. So if
And
we
those are
can,
the targets.
if
Those
we
are
can-
the
if we can
proposed
stick
targets.
to those, we're good.
Mhm.
I'm trying to understand the red line there. Is the red line this like problem we've had of unspent money that we should have been or could have and should have been spending? Do I need to worry about the red line going to 0 in 2028? Because if the other bars represent what we need, what's healthy, right?
Okay, okay. Todd, I see your question. So this gap.
It's almost the
between
same
red
question.
line-
And so what happens to the yellow? Yeah, does the yellow go away in 29,
No,
30?
she's saying.
Yes. So
That's what I'm wondering.
So the gap between the red line and the top of these stacks is the deficit. So what this is trying to illustrate is these are our projected reserves.
Okay, so really this says in 2026,
We
we
would
would not
not-
fully fund the
Absolutely.
bar.
Yes. The flip side of this chart would be if 28, 29, and 30, those bars were all under the 0 line. And we presented it both ways, but we got stuck on you can't really have a 0 cash. But the opposite visual would be these would all be negative under the line. So in 28, if we don't change and we continue to reserve the same way, we will not be able to fund the reserves. We essentially will be out of cash. Now that, we know it, we're not going to do that. That's not sustainable. We've talked about this for a few years, and we have that window to make a change.
Talking about that over the last couple of years, what we've done is gone back and looked and budgeted for 24 differently because we were trying to figure out, because this graph had been shown for years, but it never materialized. So we were like, okay, why? And going back and looking at it, it was because we were budgeting 100% of employees all year long. We weren't executing on the CIP that was going into that and so forth. So those things all created money that would carry over. And so it wasn't giving us the accurate picture. We changed that this year, thanks to the board doing that. And now it's identified, okay, this is an issue that we need to deal with. The other thing I just want to make sure is clear, because it took me a while to get my head wrapped around, those reserve numbers are driven by what our inputs. So if we input a lot of capital projects, that capital reserve has to go way up. If we're buying a lot of vehicles, that goes way up. So when Shonda was talking about studying things like what's the useful life of a vehicle, if you extend it out to 15 years, that number changes. There are things we need to look at, like, does that change the preventive maintenance cycle such that it doesn't really save you money? I mean, there's things we need to look at. So I'm not advocating that that's a good thing, but it's one of the things that we are looking at. And so just because it took me a while, and you all are smarter than I am, but it took me a while to realize that it was inputs that were driving a lot of those numbers, and we control what those inputs are. Like, do we need to develop the north lot on that time frame that we had? Trying to go through nice to haves, good to haves, mandatories, those kinds of things, and that will drive a different outcome and number. But we wanted to show something that was big and would grab attention, because it does highlight the policy choices. We will be making tough decisions about $30 million, $40 million over the next 4-year period for zero emission. Is that what we want to do? It highlights that we may not be able to afford it, even if we want to do it. How are we going to make those decisions? So anyway, I'll shut up now. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Todd, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of the same question Michael had. Like, for this slide and then the slide 15 above that, like, are these, this is what we want it to look like, assuming there might be new grant sources and new revenues? Or are these, if we continue on the current trajectory we're on, this is what it's going to look like? Because especially the slide before this, I'm like, wow, that's magic. We keep spending more than we're bringing in. And then the reserves, and I wish the county had that problem. So, like, I mean, if the red line on that graph, I guess what I want my brain to be able to visualize is what's like the worst case scenario looking like, and should those last 3 bars for 28, 29, 30 be negative instead of just having that red line there? And then on the slide before this, like, what's the green field for projected reserves look like if we keep the current burn rate?
This would be, in my opinion, the worst case scenario, where we have spent down our cash by spending more than we take in, and we are unable to fund our reserves. So this would be the worst case scenario.
So the way to really visualize this is just erase those last 3 bars.
Sure, you could erase those last bars, those last 3 columns, they wouldn't exist. And then in this slide, that black line of reserves wouldn't exist. So they're trying, we went back and forth on the slides to try and visually show this, but yes.
I like the doom and gloom look.
Okay. All right.
Like the
doom and
Doom and gloom.
So in 28, we have a large capital reserve. I assume that's because we plan to buy a bunch of buses and we need the reserve.
That is really for primarily for the zero emission. The gray is the vehicle reserve, that small gray bar. So we're really ramping up for the capital, which infrastructure falls into that reserve category. So it's a paint booth, the swale across the creek.
I guess so then we're spending that green bar down between 28 and 29.
Correct. Yes, we
It's
will
not
have
like
those
that.
outflows in 28, and then we'll have.
So it's not like a fleet reserve where it's not fleet reserve.
It is not. And the fleet reserve to gray, that moves based on really the number of vehicles that we want to replace or expand. That green bar, the gray is really our local batch. The gray bar is capital and infrastructure that we may or may not, the green, yes, that we may not have grant funding for, but that is in our plan. And those are the ones that we can stretch out, control, dial those knobs, so that the fate of those 3 bars, those 3 stacks in 28 through 30, a little in 26 and 27, are really up to us and how we load that capital project list. And then also up to us is that closing the gap between operating revenues and expenses. And honestly, that will be the harder challenge.
Right, I mean, I as you all said, we have levers, we can delay projects, but go back to the previous graph. It's that operating gap that's actually more concerning to me.
Yeah. And I will say that, as Les had mentioned with the 2024 budgeting, we often have budgeted an operating loss for years. And it's never materialized because we had those structural issues. So I think, Scott, you would remember where we'd have a $3 million budget lapse, we started calling it. And so we're trying to get the budget tighter so we really can anticipate we'll be spending or investing this much money. And we won't have those big swings. So we've been kind of living on those big swings for the past years. And that's how we got all this cash, plus COVID. And we're trying to tighten that back up so we and you aren't surprised by that. And we can have a more consistent plan than saying, oh, now we have $4 extra million we didn't plan on. And so we've had a little bit of, I won't say false hope, but we've been just kind of living large lately. And we're trying to dial that back and be realistic because we have big goals and big things we want to do. And those are going to be the trade-off conversations we'll have to have.
Board's credit, budgeting differently this year really highlighted and driving and hiring Devin to really drive our execution on our CIP really highlighted these things that, okay, this is real, this is where it's going. But the good thing is we've identified this far enough in advance where we can work on this. We have time for, Sean and I have been joking, we're not Thelma and Louise, heading off the cliff. We've got
We're not doing that. We're not doing that.
Yeah, we've got time to break and turn and do things necessary. But did want to show, I don't know what you call this, conservative, aggressive, whatever, however you characterize that slide, but did want to show the worst case scenario because it will drive when we're talking about can we really afford to do all these things and help us.
So what we'll be really looking for from the board between now and our next meeting is what's your level of comfort with this risk, with this proposal of these projects for 2025? Just looking at 2025, in 26, we would tee up really that large, in 25, we would tee up that larger conversation about policy. What does the capital project list look like? So when you're approving CIP, you would see this picture each time. I think that would be an improvement we could make. So you're not seeing it just with the budget. You're saying, okay, if we decide this, here's what it looks like. We are comfortable with this for 25. Would we be comfortable with this for every year after? No, and that's not what we're proposing.
One of the things Sean is working on too is a financial model. So as next year we're talking about CIPs and things, we'll have this model where we could pull out and plug in, and you can see how it adjusts these numbers into the future. So it'll really become a good planning tool as we're looking at these into the future. And so, as Shonda said, we think this is a responsible budget that really focuses on our main core mission of putting good service out there that gets ahead of a number of developments. We know the waterfront has a number of units going in, hundreds of units going in. We know there's 3 buildings in permitting stage in Old Town. We know King Mountain. So there's things there that we're getting out ahead of that. Applying kind of a private, because we're not private, but applying that investing to, we know where our market share is going, and this will help us capture that market share and do it in a way where people are forming transportation behaviors at the beginning, as opposed to coming in later and saying, hey, we're asking you to change those behaviors down the road. So we feel like this is a responsible budget, because as Shonda said, we're also trying to look to the future as well. And as we're studying these things, we have that ability to do that, preserve to the future, and still have time to fix these structural inequities in our budget.
So here's our timeline. And the November 7th, if I-2117 passes, we will likely cancel that public hearing, kind of rejigger things, bring the board a budget to pass, and then we will spend time after January probably doing some more adjustments to it and amending it. So that's what that alternative date is.
Yeah, just to be clear, if it does pass, we will come back. All these new initiatives that were in here, we will come back. And we will still need to cut more, as Shonda says, as we look forward into the years.
So with all that said,
I'll make a motion that we set the public hearing for
Thank you,
November 7th.
There we go.
you read my mind.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion, question? All right, all in favor of setting the public hearing for November 7th, please say aye. Any opposed? Any opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you all.
Next up is the consent agenda. All right, we have a motion and a second. Questions? Comments? All right, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Doesn't look like it. All right, and we have 8 minutes. Do we want to do an introduction or?
Yeah, I think we're ready to do a short introduction.
Okay.
Well, we're not going to cover the whole area, but we'll start.
Maybe Amber could just show slide 2 since it fits our pie theme.
Or hold up the pie.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'll just kick it off really quickly. Introduction, just an introduction. First, I want to start with basically the problem statement. So WTA has not really operated under a larger framework of how and how much service each part of the county should receive, right? So the problem is we don't really have that overall guidance. And so when we're looking at service changes, for example, we use various tools to make recommendations to the board. So we use WTA 2040, our long-range transit plan, which provides sort of the high-level guidance for service, but no specific components for any particular year. We talk about social equity and our access to opportunity. That's a key driver for us. We look at our service evaluation guidelines, which the board adopted this past year, and that talks about performance. It's mostly a look back on the service that we provided, though. It doesn't really provide much guidance to the future. And then finally, we look at getting customer requests, and those are mostly one-offs. What do people need in the community for their particular needs? And so a lot of the things that come to you are basically based on our professional judgment, right? We are kind of cherry picking that particular year with what we think we should accomplish. And so you can imagine there would be various competing needs and choices, and a lot of that's coming from staff to the board. And so what we feel we need to get from you is basically a better sense of what outcomes that you want to achieve for the system. So we're going to be seeking your direction over a multi-part series of conversations and discussions. We would have loved to give you some more background today, but we'll save that for maybe December when we have more time, and then get more discussion at that time. So I guess with that, Maureen, I think you wanted to kind of
Sure, just
engagement.
Just a couple of things. One, if anyone didn't do the homework, we'll never know now because you'll have at least another but yeah, I just want to say we expect this to be a fascinating conversation. We will provide some facts, there will be some charts, but mostly it will really be a chance for the board to explore and really think about, how do they want to see us produce outcomes, not for pockets of the county, but for the whole county. And it won't be easy, but I think it will be interesting and fascinating and possibly even fun. And if it isn't, I hope you'll let us know. We'll try to make it more so. And because we have such a short time, I just wonder if anyone has insights or thoughts from the homework or questions from the homework, and we could.
Was it helpful?
Yeah, and was it helpful? Exactly, good question. And is that even okay to ask for you to do homework?
If the video was the homework, then it was very enlightening.
Okay, excellent. Yes, it was. Yes, good. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you think about things in a different way in terms of getting ridership versus coverage.
Yeah.
It's thought-provoking.
Yeah, thought it was really good.
I know one of the things that jumped out at me after discussions with Les and so forth is it seems to me that historically we've just been doing what we do without any underlying philosophical or underlying standard of why we're doing what we do. And without the understanding of, just like Scott said, ridership versus coverage and what that means. And so I'm really looking forward to having the discussion so that we can, because I was surprised that there wasn't some underlying, for lack of a better word, philosophy about how do we make those decisions, in what context do we make those decisions?
Hoping to grapple with.
Yeah.
We could also ask, is there anything you think you need in addition to what we sent you and what you anticipate we're going to say? Because we have some time now to prepare additional materials if there's something specific.
Tim has a lot of materials.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there.
I guess one thing other methods of moving people around other than a 40-foot bus. And I know that because it's a 40-foot bus, the maintenance is easy because it's all the same. But perception-wise, is it better to have, paratransit sized buses to your remote areas? Because they're never full anyway. And it would look like it's getting utilized better. Or something like that. And the capital cost of a bus versus a paratransit vehicle is significantly different. So, I'm guessing that most of the remote areas are never full on the bus.
I think that's something we can touch on.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to dive into that level of detail at the next meeting,
Yeah,
but I think we will have an
Yes.
opportunity to talk about that for sure.
Something I've been trying to think about for actually years is what I call the topology of a transit system. You can see it really easily in fixed route systems like railroads or metro stations for cities. There are different formations. We've been a hub and spoke model because it fit our geography at the time. Maybe it still does. We're now have some other minor hubs, but there are other topologies for other places. Circles or their overlapping lines. There's different topologies. Is there a way we can erase our current topology, write a new one, and would that have any benefits in terms of coverage or equity, right? So I mean, just how the spider web looks. Is there a different spider web that we have? Can we go back and look at that, or are we just the way the city is laid, the county is laid out? There's really only one topology which makes sense, and it's one we do. So I kind of want to step as far back as I can and think about that.
And I mentioned it to Les, I think earlier this week. Traveling, I see a lot of buses in Europe that are running on the wire like they do in Seattle. And I'm just wondering if our high use routes in Bellingham, rather than going battery electric or hydrogen or whatever, maybe a third option would be hooked to the grid as a way to get away from the fossil fuels that we want to get away from.
Yeah, we can share materials on that as well.
And it may be very high initial cost, but over the 20-year lifespan, maybe not bad. I don't know. But I see them used in a lot of places. Aesthetically, it's not great, but
There are hybrids that go on the wire until they
some
leave
of
the core.
yeah, some of them are, yeah. Some are just strictly on the wire. But that's it. Yeah.
I would wonder, when I was looking, I was boiling it down, but it really boils down to money. So I'm wondering what each area we spend on. Saying, we got the city of Bellingham. I don't know how much we spend here in proportion to how much we spend everywhere else. And maybe that's a part of the puzzle to say, all right, how much are we allocating to each of these areas? And then do we need to change that allocation based on how we want to figure out the ridership? But I think, the money side is also important, and I'd like to see, how the pie. Yeah.
There you go.
Well
You're
done.
onto it now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Way to go, Vicky.
You nailed it today.
And I think related to that question, others have said to me, is this Whatcom Transit Authority or Western's Transit Authority?
Right, yeah.
Are we catering to that crowd because it's high ridership and makes us all look good? But is that really the crowd we should be But it is training future generations to use mass transit. So there's all kinds of benefits.
Yeah, when I read that and when Les and I were talking about this, I came from Tacoma and there, I believe it still is the same way. The city owns the transit company. And if you went outside the city limits, it was, you had milk, basically nothing. And it seems that our situation here, it's a hybrid of both the city, what Bellingham's situation is, topography. I don't know what that even means. I'm just a piano player. And, or the more rural areas, but the conversation we had, I believe it was at the last meeting, where we were sort of talking about ways to support the coverage model out in the county, meaning we run limited service, but are there other ways to support that, to get people to the bus that can go back and forth? And those are the kinds of conversations to me, like if we had that underlying whatever philosophy, theory, then that would guide our conversations about both models. See, as opposed to, well, let's run a line out to Kendall because that'll improve ridership, and that's not a ridership decision. That's a coverage call. But if we want to increase ridership, can we do it in a way that maybe provides another level of service to get to that coverage line, to get back and forth? But those are discussions down the road. That's how I see it.
You're all hitting on all the good, or much of the good stuff. There'll be more to come. This is great. It's great.
All right, anything further? Thank you. Other business? Announcements? Go ahead.
Friday is my last day at the Linden Community Senior Center. And the center is also going to be under construction for an HVAC project. So the building will be closed all of November and December. So I know we have a lot of riders that use paratransit to get to our building. So I was trying to tell
Kelly.
Kelly. That was my one job today, was to tell you that we're going to be, so if anyone calls in for a ride in November and December to the center, don't pick them up. We're not there. So, yeah.
All right.
I'm taking a new position at Lions Camp Horizon Foundation. So we'll be working with them.
She'll be working with you on that this summer.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, shoot, sorry.
Sorry, we were talking.
Oh.
I'm moving out to Lions Camp Horizon Foundation, so hopefully we'll be partnering with you on some.
She
can break each other in.
It's really cute. She thinks she's retired.
Yeah. Any other announcements? All right, we are adjourned.